Hey everybody, Jacob Scott Lowrance, product expert. And as you can see, it is cold and been snowing here in Oklahoma. It's not cold enough that our lakes are so frozen that we can get out there and ice fish like you anglers up north. But it's cold enough, pretty much every one of our boat ramps is frozen. So, you know what's that mean? It means it's a great time for a garage project. And that means anything from getting rods and reels ready to getting your boat ready to get out there on the water. We've had a lot of requests for it, so we're going to go ahead and play it for you guys again. This is our webinar where we do a retrofit of an older boat with some new Lowrance HDS live equipment. There's a lot of great information in this video for anybody retrofitting a boat, or even if you're doing new installs on a boat. The same practices apply here. So let's go ahead. So one thing I am going to tell you, we're going to be live on the chat. So that's me and the rest of the team. We're going to be there answering your questions. Whoever's got the best question of the night gets to win yourself a Lowrance hat and a Lowrance neck gaiter. So keep your head and your neck warm while you're out there on the water. So let's go ahead and get to it. Here's our Lowrance webinar on retrofitting an older boat with new equipment. Hey everybody, Jacob Scott Lowrance, product expert. Today, we've got something new for you. We've got a little bit of video for you guys to watch because what we've done is we've taken a 1997 boat and we've done a retrofit to upgrade it to HDS live units. So we spent a couple days going through this boat, pulling wires out. A lot of stuff for you guys to see, some tips and tricks that are just going to be in there for you. If you decide you're going to do a retrofit on your boat, these are really important things you guys should pay attention to. So don't forget, guys, hashtag Anglers Unite. We all know everybody's out there. Times have been tough. You know, things are kind of changing. Things are getting a little bit better. But the best part is we've been able to spend so much time on the water. I mean, my wife asks me every day, she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I got to go to the lake and do some work. She goes, I think you're just fishing. And I was like, no, honey, I swear, I'm working. But anyhow, get out there. Take those kids out there. Take family members out there. Hashtag it, Anglers Unite. Share those videos with us at our Lowrance Facebook page. Don't forget, we have also got the Lowrance YouTube channel where you can get a lot of helpful tips and videos with how to run your equipment. So we've got the boat here. You can see we've got some units on it. But let's go ahead and get started and look at this video. So we're going to look at this video. We're going to run through it. We're also going to answer questions for you. We got guys standing by answering questions live on the chat. And then we're going to take some of those questions and answer them for you right here. So let's go ahead and look at that video now. All right, everybody, the first thing I typically do is I start with the hardest stuff first. And especially on a boat like this, it's an older boat. It's been used. People have added stuff to it and taken stuff out of it. The hardest thing typically to do is to run that transducer from the back of this boat up to the console for our unit there. So that's where we're going to start. I'm going to clip the zip tie right here. We're going to open some hatches and we're going to see if I can get a set of fish sticks run up to the front of here so we can get a transducer on the back of this boat. So when we look at the back of the boat, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and come back here and cut the zip tie that holds this closed. We'll pull this zip tie out. That's going to give us a little bit of room in here. So now we'll start opening hatches on this boat. And we're going to start looking through this boat, figure out where all this stuff runs. You see we've got an opening back up underneath here. We've got a lot of stuff that's going to be in the way. We've got batteries, we've got oil tanks. And that's one of the things that we talk about on these older boats is having to work around the equipment that's already in these boats. All right, so since we've opened up the back of the boat, now we're going to start looking at the console, figure out where I've got tubes and areas to run through this boat so that I can get the transducer from the back of the boat to the front of the boat. Now, one of the most important things that we use in this is we call these fish sticks. These came from Harbor Freight. You can get them at most stores. But what's really good is they're these are about a 3-4 foot long. They're fiberglass and flexible. So as you can see, you can take them and they make the bends around these boats. So these are a lot easier than trying to run string or, you know, something that isn't rigid to the back of the boat. So we run these and they screw together real easily. So You can make them whatever length you need to. It's that quick. So the great part is once we find that tube where we can start feeding these through, and again, you've got a lot of flexibility in them. So it gives it the ability to run around the curves and stuff to the back of the boat, so we can figure out how to get the transducer cable up here to the console. All right, so one thing you run into on a boat when you're doing a retrofit like this is cable ties. Lots and lots of cable ties. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're up under the dash. We're clipping some cable ties that have a bunch of wires bundled up here together. And we're gonna get these pulled out and kind of figure out what wire goes to what. As you can see, I mean, look at this big old bundle of wires that I'm starting to pull out here. There's more wire ties underneath here also. So we're gonna get some of these clipped. We're gonna get these wires sorted out as to what goes to where. And then we'll also be able to get our transducer cables run to the back of the boat. So I'm on the top of the boat here. I'm gonna pull the old fish finder off. But to help sort out that massive tangle of cables down there, we're gonna pull this out. I'm gonna take the old clamshell out. We're gonna undo the cables from the back of this fish finder. We're gonna pull them through here and work on getting things cleaned out. Another thing I always try to do when I'm taking screws out of boats is I always try to put them somewhere close to where I took them out of. That way I know those are the screws that go back into that area. And you never know what you're going to find when you're cleaning boats out. So the other thing is when you're pulling these out, try to be gentle. Sometimes you're only just trying to make enough room to see what's going on behind and not pull everything out, which is kind of what we're doing here. We're just trying to be able to see back in here and try and figure out what all of these wires are and get them disconnected and out of the boat. All right, guys, so when we talk about these boats and older wiring in them, I had a hold of this wire that said a temp sensor. We've got a temp sensor on the back of the boat, so I thought maybe this wire was going to lead to it. So I started pulling on the wire, waiting to see the movement on the cable of the back of the boat, and what I wound up with was just a wire that had been cut and left inside the boat. So that's what we talk about, like especially about cleaning up wiring when you're doing an install on one of these boats where you're doing a retrofit. It's better to go ahead, go in here, pull this stuff out, clean it out, and then you got a better boat, and it also gives you more room in the tubes to pull the cables you need to pull. All right, we've been under the console, we've been clipping zip ties, pulling cords out. Now, I talked to you a second ago about that temp sensor that I just pulled out. This whole mass of wires that I've just discovered in here and pulled out of some of that zip tie, this is to equipment that is no longer on this boat. So we have a transducer, we have a power cord, we have this big mass of wires that was just zip tied up in here. Again, that's why it's really important to be able to do your best you can on a retrofit and remove these old cables. All right, we discovered that the temp sensor that's back here on the back of this boat, obviously it's not going to be used anymore. It's an old temp sensor, and the transducers are going to have temp sensors in them. We discovered that it's got a clean pull line all the way to the front of the boat. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking all of these wire ties off of this temp sensor. I'm going to unscrew it from the back of the boat here. Then I'm going to tape my the end of the transducer to this tip sensor, and we're going to use this temp sensor to pull the transducer to the front of the boat. We're going to go ahead and pull these clips off and save these clips so that when we run our transducer cable down to this area, we can use these clips to hold the transducer cable also. These are just wire clips. They'll go around the wire, and then the screw runs through there, and it'll hold it up against the hull of the boat. All right, everybody, so here is my active imaging 3-in-1 transducer. See, we just took it out of the box. It's all nice and coiled up here. So one thing I like to do with these is I always try to stretch these out before I try to pull them through a boat. That way, I've got the cord all out. If you just set that down with all those loops right there and try to pull it through the boat, inevitably what's going to happen is they're going to kind of coil up on you and get kinked up, and they're going to get stuck, and you're just going to yell and scream at it for a minute. So, like I said, I like to try and get things stretched out. As you can see these coils that are all spinning out while I'm doing this. So once I get that all stretched out like that, I'm going to take this end, and again, we're going to go up here to that temp sensor we just took off the back of the boat. I'm going to lay them across each other like that. Then I'm going to take my electrical tape. I go through a ton of electrical tape rigging boats. We use it for things like, as you can watch here, I'm going to come all around this, and I'm just going to tape it on here really good. Literally every time I go to the store, I buy another roll. And when I say roll, I don't mean just a single roll. I buy a big 10-pack of electrical tape. My wife's like always, why do you need so much electrical tape? And I was like, because I use it, and now you can see what I'm using it for. So you might think you can just make a quick loop around here and be done. But you don't want to do that. You want to make sure everything's secured together, because if I just made a quick loop around here, just one quick pass with the tape, and didn't make sure everything was in here nice and tight, if I got into a bind inside the boat and pulled too hard, then the tape would come off, and then I'm back to square one where I have to try and run a fish stick or something like that to the back of the boat. So another thing I do is I have a tendency to cut my tape when I'm done with it. Number one, it gives me something nice and clean there. I don't have ragged edges, and when you pull on that tape to tear it, it gets really tight, and it'll bind up sometimes and make it kind of hard to get off when it's time to take this off. So I just like to, for me, it's just makes things a little bit easier if I cut it with a straight edge. So now that we've got this all taped up, I'm going to get on the wires up front. I'm going to start pulling that wire through. Then I'm going to come back here and make sure this feeds in here properly. Then I'm going to pull the transducer, this active imaging 3-in-1 transducer, to the front of the boat. All right, now I'm going to give this a couple pulls. Get everything tight back here. Now we're going to move back here. And we're going to get this pulled up to the boat. Get these cables pulled up here. I'm going to pull this a little bit tighter. right, now that I got this pulled up snug to the pass-through, I'm going to come in here, work it around those cables. Now that I know I'm in the pass-through, I'm going to go ahead and finish pulling it to the front of the boat. All right, and now we've got the transducer up here at the console. So I'm going to go ahead and get my tape off of here, and then we will get ready to mount transducers and units on this boat. So I have my active image 3-in-1 transducer that we're getting ready to install on the boat. So if I had a glassed-in transducer in the hull of this boat, I would probably come up here with it. That way it's up below the bottom of the boat. A lot of anglers that fish brush and stuff like to have it up out of the way where they're not bumping it. But since this is also going to be our transducer that we use while we're on pad, I'm actually going to come beneath these steps. I'm going to come right in here. I've got a nice spot right here. So as you can see, I've got a bunk on this side. I've got a strake here, and then we got the strake towards the bottom of the pad here. I've got this nice open area right in here. I look at it, I'm eyeballing it. It looks like I can get it, the transducer, level like I need it for this position. So this is where we're going to go ahead and put the transducer on this boat. So the next thing I'm going to do is, after I decide where I'm going to put the transducer, since this is a white boat, this is much easier to do it with. I take my Sharpie, I put my transducer up here, kind of eyeball the area that I want it to go, kind of look underneath the boat, make sure that I'm good on my pad area where I want it. Now I'm going to come in here, I'm going to mark this side, I'm going to mark this side of the transducer. So now that I got those areas marked, I can see them right there. Now I'm going to take the drill and I'm going to drill the holes for my screws to go through. So when I talk about these 3-in-1 transducers, and I just mentioned briefly about the right height of where I placed it when I set it up here. So what I'm looking for on this is I just want a little sliver of this transducer to be beneath the pad of the boat. And I've got something here that I can show you guys that'll help you understand it better. Let me go grab this real quick. All right, so when I was talking about just a sliver of the transducer, you can see where I've got this transducer painted blue. It's just a really small portion. And this represents basically the transom of a V-bottom type boat. And as you can see, there's just a very small portion of this transducer that's going to run underneath the boat. Turn it upside down, show you there. And you just want this thinnest sliver of this transducer in the water. The more of this transducer that you get below the bottom of the boat, the more turbulence it creates. And when you create that turbulence, it creates bubbles underneath the transducer. An air bubble will form on this transducer. And when that air bubble forms on this transducer, that's when you lose your bottom. All right, so as I get ready to drill a hole in the boat, the first thing I do is I find the drill bit I want to use. And even though I know that typically a 5/32 is the right size to use, a lot of times what I do is I'll take my drill bit and then I'll take the screw and I'll lay my drill bit up here alongside my screw like this, just to make sure that my drill bit's pretty much the same size as the shank of my screw. And the reason I do that, especially with stainless steel screws, is when you drill in, when you go to screw them in after you've drilled the hole, if your hole's too small, they don't always cut really good. And when they get too much torque on them, you can actually spin the head off. So once you've broken that head off, then you're going to have to find a new spot to drill another hole to put this in, because you don't always have enough to be able to take that broken drill bit out, or the broken screw out. Now as we start to drill into the fiberglass, when we drill into the gel coat, what we do instead of drilling straight in is we run our drill bit in reverse to get through the gel coat. And what this does is it prevents the gel coat from cracking. Once we've gotten through the first part of the gel coat, nice and smooth. All right, now that I got my holes drilled, the next thing that's going to happen is I'm going to add some silicone to the boat. I actually get very generous with my silicone because, well, I really don't want any water coming into my boat when I'm out there all day. So I'm a little more generous than some people are with the silicone. I like to make sure that I get it in the hole that I've drilled and around the hole that I've drilled, so that once I screw the transducer bracket down, the transducer bracket is going to kind of squish some of that silicone out and around and make sure that I've got a really good seal up against the hull of this boat. So some people look at that and they go, well, that's a lot of silicone, don't you think? And well, like I said, I'd rather have all the holes sealed in my boat when I'm out on the water. The other thing you should make sure you do before you screw a bracket in is make sure you've got your cable run where you want it and in between whatever other wires are at the back of the boat, because once you screw it down and it dries, it's really hard to make those adjustments. So I like to make sure that I have all that in place before I screw this to the transom. So I got that one in close. I'll go ahead and get my next screw set up, ready to go in. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and get my transducer set like we were talking about, with just a little bit of it below the water line. So as I come in here and I look at it, I'm really happy with how I look right there. So now I'm going to cinch everything down good and tight on this transducer bracket. All right, so we don't have any wiggle in that now. So the last thing I have left to do, so I'm just going to go ahead and use those cable clips that we took off earlier, and I'm going to secure this transducer cable on the transom of this boat. So part of the trick to this is to make sure you don't have a whole lot of excess cable hanging down and creating drag in the water, because excess cable can get caught on stuff and potentially ripped off the boat. Now I'm going to go up to the hole where the clip was, a little dollop of silicone, and we're going to screw it back into place. Okay, so now that we've got our clips in, we're all done here on the back of the boat with this transducer. So now we're going to just snug up the cable in the tube. We're going to get everything tightened up front, and we're going to start installing units on this boat. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed what we've shown you so far and gotten a lot of really good tips out of this. Now, when this started off, we thought, all right, we're going to do a real quick one-day installation, get everything going. Now, we were talking earlier about slowing things down, doing it right the first time. So we're going to show you why that's important here in just a second. But if you guys have questions about the install and doing installations, go ahead and throw some of those questions in the chat box, and we're going to answer those in just a minute. But let's get back to talking about doing it right the first time. So we talked about, we pulled some old wires out of the boat and things like that. When I say we pulled a few old wires out of the boat, we pulled a 5-gallon bucket full of wires out of this boat. We took the 2 old units off. We got the brackets, but look at all of this wire. This wire is not just the wire that was for these 2 units. This wire was from units that were previously in the boat. I mean, there were a total of 3 transducers glassed into the back of this boat. So we had all of those wires that we pulled out. One of them, yes, was for these units, but there was 2 other transducers from previous installs. So again, going through, kind of slowing things down, doing it right the first time saves a lot of time. Like I said, I say that 2 or 3 times. Going in, cleaning it up. Like I said, bundles of wires zip tied together, tucked up underneath there. It just makes a jumbled mess that you have to go through. So now let's go ahead and see if we've got some questions. I know one of the questions that I saw earlier, people were asking, what units can I upgrade to? So if you have something like a Hook 2, the only direct upgrade option you have would be go to the Hook Reveal series. The power cord and the transducer for the Hook 2 and the Hook Reveal are only shared between those 2 units. They won't work with an HDS or a TI or anything like that. So those are your direct upgrade options for your Hook 2. Now if you want to go from a Hook 2 to say a TI or HDS series, then you're going to have to replace your transducer and you're going to have to replace your power cord. But you know, there's a lot of things that you can do. It's real easy. The Elite Ti's, the HDS's, they all use the same power cords and transducers. So again, there's a lot of compatibility when moving up. So we have our good, better, best, which our good is our Hook 2s and the Hook Reveal lines. So that's where we start. And then from there we move up to the Elite Ti and the Elite Ti2. That's our better. And then we go to our best. That's our HDS series. That's our carbons. That's our Gen 3s. That's HDS Live. Those are the units that can do it all for you. So they give you the ability for, you know, radar compatibility, networking capability between multiple units. So you have all of those options available. So let's see what kind of questions we've got. One of the questions that I've seen on here is about batteries. What battery should I be using? Should I connect it to my cranking battery? Should I connect it to my trolling motor batteries? Excuse me. We always connect it to our cranking battery. Now, if you have the ability to have a dedicated house battery just for your electronics, that's a great option too. But for us, connecting to the cranking battery, it's a good fit for you, because if you have it connected to your trolling motor batteries, you can get interference from your trolling motors when you're stepping on your pedal, and the magnetic interference from your trolling motor. A lot of guys will see it when they step on their trolling motor pedal. They say, my sonar screen kind of blanks out. That's interference from your trolling motor. If you're connected to your cranking battery, you're less likely to see that. Another reason that you want to be connected to your cranking battery, in my opinion, is when I'm on the water and I'm running my big motor, it's going to be putting charges back into my battery. So it's not going to be just draining all day long. If I had a dedicated house battery, I wouldn't have anything charging it. So again, that's why I like connecting to a cranking battery. As far as what size, whatever size works best for you. I know for me, I'm electronics heavy in my boats, and I typically use a 31 group or a 31 series battery, so that I've got a higher amperage and longer usage on that. So let's see. David, do you see any questions there?
What transducer is best for a Live 12? 3-in-1, active imaging, or 3D structure science?
Okay, so the question was, what transducer is best to use with your HDS Live 12? A total scan, an active imaging 3-in-1, or structure scan 3D. So this question is basically, which structure scan do I want to use? For me personally, I love the active imaging. The clarity, the range is really good on it. So with active imaging, at 800 kilohertz, you can do 150 feet to each side of the boat. So that's a total of 300 feet of coverage. Now structure scan, it has great clarity also. You get further range, so you can do 300 feet to each side of the boat for a total of 600 feet with your structure scan 3D. But in all reality, how many times are you really going to be looking out 300 feet to each side of the boat? So the range, you know, when you're looking out that further, everything on your screen gets smaller because you're looking at that extended range. So for me personally, I love the active imaging, be it the 3-in-1 or the 2-in-1. On my boat, I use a 2-in-1 active imaging transducer, and then I use a through-hull 2D sonar transducer. So it works really well, great clarity. Like I said, 800 kilohertz, 150 feet each side of the boat. It's unbelievable what I can find when I'm out there. David, any other questions that you can see about the installs?
So when you upgrade to a larger unit in your older boat, should you upgrade your power?
Okay, so the question is, if you upgrade to a larger unit in your older boat, should you upgrade your power? And the question they're asking there is, my power wires that go to the back of the boat, should I upgrade those? In my opinion, yes. I don't even think it's just if you're upgrading with an older boat. If you have the ability to upgrade your power wires on your boat, I think it is the best thing possible because it gives you clean power. So larger wires give you less drop in voltage. So if I've got 13 volts at my battery, if I'm using, so there's a company, C Clear Power. He makes these great wiring harnesses. They're made out of 8-gauge wire. It comes with 2 drops, one that runs to the console. It's 26 foot long, so it'll run to the bow of the boat also. What I love about them, 8-gauge wire. When I connect my units up to it, I get virtually no loss of voltage. If I'm reading 13.6 volts at my battery at the back of the boat, you're darn certain I'm pretty much going to be at 13.6 or maybe 13.5 at my console and at the bow when I'm using that. Again, the heavier duty wire, it doesn't build up as much heat and resistance as the thinner gauges wires. So again, that's why we talk about, yes, it is a good idea that if you're not sure about your wiring in your boat and you have the ability and the time, yes, I would run new wires for the front and for the console and the bow. So we're going to go ahead. We've answered a couple questions here. So now we're going to go ahead and look at day 2 of this install on the boat. On day 2, we do more wire running, but on day 2, we also get the units installed, and then we have the ability to take it out to the water and do some testing. So let's go ahead and take a look at day 2 of this install. Hey everybody, we're starting day 2 of this. Now you go like, I thought it was like real quick and real simple. It can be, and then it can't be. So we're not rushing this, we're taking our time, we're going through and we're doing it right. Like I said, this is a retrofit on an older boat. This is a 1997 boat. People have done a lot of work to it in the past. They've had transducers on it, they've had other units on it. And just to show you what I mean, look at this massive cables that I took out of this boat. This was all under the dash and in the console. Some of it was bundled up. Some of it I bundled up just to keep things straight while I was trying to pull things out. But I mean, this is just a glowing example of doing it right the first time. I could have just left all of this stuff tucked up in under the dash. But if we ever had to do any more work on the boat once we're done with it, then we're going to have to deal with this again. I mean, when I was pulling stuff out of this boat, there's 3 transducers glassed into the back of this boat. So that was a whole lot of cable running to the back of the boat that's now out of my way. So if I have to pull a different transducer or we want to add another transducer to this at the back of the boat, I now have room in those tubes to be able to pull those through. So again, doing it right the first time saves a lot of time. I mean, there's no other way to say it. So now we're going to go ahead and start prepping our cables that are going back in this boat. So this is going to be my power cord that goes at the console for the console unit. I need to crimp some ends on these wires. So I've taken my wires. You'll notice I've got 3 wires. I've got a black, a red, and a yellow. The 2 that I'm going to need for this install is just the black and the red. Now people ask what the yellow wire is for, and it's called a wake-up wire. So if I were adding something like a 3D module or something like that that I want to turn on when I power up my unit, I would connect this yellow wire to the yellow wire of the power cord of the module that I'm adding. And so when we talk about that, especially for Lowrance, when we talk about adding the modules, it's things like Structure Scan 3D or a sonar hub or something like that. If I were to connect, if I had 2 units at the console and I connected this power wire to a power cord for another HDS unit, it would not turn that unit on. Some people think that'll happen, but it will not happen. This wake-up wire only turns on modules, so sonar hubs, Structure Scan 3D modules, things like that. So we're going to go ahead and crimp these ends on here. I'm going to put these in place, give it a good crimp, give it a little tug, make sure it's on there tight and it's not going to come off. I'm going to do the same for this black one here. Put it on. Get a nice tight crimp on it. Again, give it a little pull, make sure it's not going to come off. So this is the power wire for my console. I'm going to toss it over there on that side so that I know what it's for. Now for the front of the unit, or for the front unit up here on the bow, instead of using the flat blade male connectors, I need the flat blade female connectors for what's up here underneath the bow. So I'm going to go ahead and I also use these ones that are shielded like this up here. That way they don't make contact with the other plugs that are around it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this one in here. I'm going to slide it down in. Give it a good crimp on here. Make sure it's on there good and tight. Go ahead and do the same for the ground wire. Now that I have the power cables done and ready to go for the bow and the console of the boat, we're going to go ahead and run the Ethernet cable and the NEMA 2000 to the front of this boat. I'm going to go ahead and get my fish sticks out. We're going to run them through the tube and up to the bow of the boat, and then we'll be able to pull these through. So the one thing you want to be sure of is with your NEMA 2000, you have a male end and a female end. So you want to make sure you pull the correct end to the front of the boat. So if I look at the back of this 12-inch unit, you can see, go ahead and move this. You can see on the unit, this is a male end on the unit. So I want to make sure when I pull this to the front of the boat that I pull this female end. That way I know it'll plug into the unit up there. All right, everybody, so I pulled the screws on the front of this boat, and I'm going to lift this out. And as you can see, we've got a really small opening up here. So one thing that I use when I'm in a situation like this to be able to see where my tube comes through up here, this is a little digital inspection camera. You can get them at Harbor Freight or a lot of other stores like that. There's also companies that sell these that connect to your cell phone via your charging port USB cables for that. I like using this. If you can see that, it's a little camera. It's got a light on it so I can shine up here underneath the boat, and then I can kind of see what I'm looking at, because as you can see, really small opening, and this gives me the ability to look in here and find my tubes and stuff that I'm looking for. All right, so you can see right here, I found the tube where my wires are going to come out of. I can see it's kind of over there tight in the corner. So now I'm going to push my fish sticks all the way up through here, and then I'm going to pull my fish stick out the top. That way I can pull the cables up here where I need them. Okay, as you can see, there's the tube that runs to the front of the boat. I'm going to run these fish sticks up in there, and this will allow me to run my Ethernet and my NEMA 2000 to the front of the boat. So as you can see, we were able to get in there, found where the fish tape was coming through. Now I'm going to start bringing it out. Okay, so now that I've got it up here, so now I'm going to go to the end that's sticking out the console, and I'm going to tape up my Ethernet and my NEMA 2000 cable so that I can pull them to the front of the boat. So now previously, as I talked about with my transducer cable, I got my NEMA 2000 cable here. I'm just going to kind of loop it up here, and then I'm going to stretch it out and try to get it straight. That way I'm not trying to pull curlicues through these tubes. I'm going to do the same with my Ethernet cable. And now since I'm pulling it to the front of the boat, a lot of these cables will have something like a tag on one end and the other end does not have a tag on it. Typically I try to pull my end to the front of the boat that does not have the tag on it. It's just so I'm not trying to pull that tape or the cable identifier through there. It's just so I'm not pulling that through the tube. So we'll go ahead and again stretch this one out. You can see one little curlicue on me there. So now I'll just stretch it, let it spin out. That way I can pull as much straight cable through these tubes as possible. See, if I was trying to pull it and it bunched up like that, that would get stuck in the tube and it just makes it harder to pull. So that's why I go through, pull these cables out kind of straight. As you can see, I've done that a couple times now. I've gotten most of the curlicues out. So now everything's going to be ready to tape to my fish tape. All right, Ethernet, I'm going to tape it up a little bit higher on my fish stick, just like we did with transducers. Put a little more tape up front and try to taper it a little bit on the front of this so that hopefully it will slide easier through these tubes. Now I'm going to take my NEMA 2000 and we're going to do the same with it. Now I'm going to lay it in line to kind of try and give it as low profile as possible. As I work down the fish tape, I always come to the end of it. So now I've got a smooth edge, so while we're pulling this through, if I have to kind of pull it backwards, I don't have anything pointy sticking out there. So this should be a smooth pull to the front of the boat. So we got most of the cable pulled through. I'm coming to the end of it now. So one thing I typically do, you can see I got my fingers down in here. I kind of try to pull with my fingers instead of pulling the tape. That way I'm not like pulling sideways on this. So I use my fingers to pull straight through the tube. As I come through the tube, a lot of times what I'll do is once I get to the end of one of my fish sticks, I'll go ahead and unscrew it and pull it off. That way I'm not fighting with all of it. And I feel like I'm right here at the end of the tube. So now, this is where it gets a little tricky because I'm trying to pull that massive stuff through. And there we go. So now I have my Ethernet and my NEMA 2000 pulled to the front of the boat. I'm still a little tight back there, so I'm going to come back here and straighten my cables up again. The other thing, I come back and make sure that I'm not pulling that cable all the way through and up into the tube, because then it would be lost up in the tube. So now I've got my cables up here, and I'm going to go ahead and take the tape off of the fish tape, and we'll be ready to start rigging everything. All right, so this is one of the old plugs that was previously up here to this front unit. I'm going to go ahead and cut these two wires off. One of these was the power wire. One of these connected to the computer in the back of the boat. I'm just doing that so that I can easily pull all of this stuff through and out of the boat. And then the other thing I'm also going to do with it is this one right here. I'm going to attach the power cable for the front of the boat to this and my fish sticks. I'm going to pull this through so that I can use my fish sticks to pull my Ethernet and my NEMA 2000 through the hole up here at the front of the boat where they've got all the power and transducers and stuff coming through. All right, so on the front of this boat, the pull hole that's right here for the cables to go through, it's got a really tight bend in it that I can't make very well with my fish sticks. They just won't bend that much. So plan B is my coat hanger. I always keep one of these handy because they're great on installation projects like this and others. They're flexible. I can bend the end of it into a hook or a U-shape if I need it to reach in somewhere and grab cables, or if I'm just trying to pull a cable through. They're good in that they will bend in there a little bit better than the fish sticks do sometimes. When I pulled that power cable through, I found a whole other mess of cables up front. So we're gonna get these pulled out and clean up the front of this boat just a little bit. This isn't someplace somebody's gonna dig into a lot, but it gives us that cleaner install. And again, like we talked about, space is valuable, so it's gonna give us a little more space up here to work with. All right, so I'm gonna cut this up here. So now all of this cable is free. I'm gonna go to the back of the boat and finish pulling that out. This is that cable we just clipped at the front of the boat. So now there's another 20 feet of wiring that I cleaned up out of this boat. When I pulled these through, they came up and around a different wiring harness in here. So what I did is I kind of fed them back through a little bit and back and up and over that wiring harness that's in here, so that when I pull these over to the cable hole, I've got a clean pull and I'm not pulling them around multiple different wiring harnesses in here. So again, just a cleaner install, less things for them to bind on while you're trying to get them pulled through. All right, wiggle it a little bit, get it up. All right, so now I have both of my cables pulled back through. I'll be able to connect these to the HDS unit when we get it mounted up here. So I put the hose clamp on here. It's gonna go around the shaft. I've got a live site transducer on here. So we're gonna get this all buttoned up. Then we're gonna run the transducer cable down into this void area where we pulled all those other cables out. Again, that's why I talk about pulling these cables out. Since I've pulled those cables out, now when I go to coil up my excess live site transducer cable, I'm gonna have a nice little area up underneath here that I can tuck it into. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the head and make sure that my transducer is pointing forward like I need it to before I cinch everything down good and tight. Looks like I've got it where I want it. Give it a little wiggle. I can still turn it a little bit, so we'll add a little more tension to it so that I don't over tighten it and strip it. Go to that last little notch in there by hand. So now we're good to go here. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna zip tie our transducer cable along the shaft. So the transducer cable comes off the back of the transducer. I push it down and tuck it down in here a little bit, and I go ahead and zip tie it right here, just so that I know I've got it locked in here at the base of the transducer. Put a cable on there, get it good and snug, and now we're going to start working up the shaft of the trolling motor. I'm going to put one more here on the bottom. And then one of the most important things I need to do at this point is we're going to make a loop in the transducer cable here like this. And what this loop does is it allows the transducer cable to spin all the way around the shaft whenever the foot pedal is worked. If I don't put a loop in here and I just keep it straight like this, it's going to bind my cable and tear it. Okay, now that I got everything zip tied up how I want it, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and deploy the trolling motor and make sure that I'm not pinching my transducer cable in here anywhere. It's really good. Now, one good thing about this boat, if you come here and look at it on this side, this boat already has a little notch in it right here that's going to allow me to run my transducer cable down in here. So once we get it in here, it's going to be a nice clean fit and you won't see the excess cable. Now that I've got all my zip ties on here, I'm going to use this set of wire cutters here. As you can see, it's a very fine set of cutters. And what I really like about these cutters is when I get in here to these zip ties, they lay flat on here. So when I cut these, it cuts smooth and it doesn't leave that little jagged edge that likes to rip you open. That if you use just like a regular pair of wire cutters to cut the tips of your zip ties off, it doesn't leave that jagged edge, so you have a nice smooth edge so that you don't have that spot that's gonna kind of cut you. Now that I pretty much know where everything is gonna go in here, I'm gonna take my transducer cable and I'm gonna make these nice small little coils with it. Try to make sure everything matches up nice and neat. And then I know approximately how much I need to leave out. I'm going to leave about 2.5 feet, not inside this coil. So I can tuck this coil up underneath and then I'll take this and run it through our hole over here with the rest of our cables so that our transducer can come out and connect to our unit. So now that I've made these nice little tight coils in here, I'm actually going to take 2 zip ties and do one on each side of it, just so it's a little bit cleaner. A lot of guys will take their cables and they'll try to like bunch them together and then squeeze them really tight. I don't like to do that with transducer cables and Ethernet cables and things like that, because if you bend them too much, there's always the chance of creating too much of a bend in the cable and causing the wires and stuff inside a cable to break. So I just like to make a nice loop like this. I can tuck it up underneath here and I've got enough of a tag in left to run over and connect to the unit. Now that I've got my transducer cable tucked up in here, I've got it in a good spot where I want it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull this Ethernet cable back through. I've got some extra Ethernet cable here, so I'm going to pull it back through and I'm going to tape the end of my transducer cable, because you can see I've got this big loop of Ethernet cable, so I'm going to tape my transducer cable onto this Ethernet cable and pull it directly through the hole. Now, one reason I'm doing that is I've already gone in here and I've taken my Ethernet cable and worked it around the wiring harnesses that are in here. So if I tape my transducer cable to the Ethernet, I can pull it right through in the exact same spot I want the other cables. Now, just like we talked about with all of this, even though I'm using the Ethernet cable that's already through here as my pull cable for the transducer, tape up as much of the front to kind of get it to where it will pull as smoothly as possible through here. I'm going to start pulling this cable through. All right. So now I've got our transducer cable pulled through. We're almost ready to start mounting all of these units. So now, got some extra transducer wire sitting there. So I'm just going to tape the end of my power wire to it and get my power wire pulled into position. We'll be able to button up the front of this boat, install our unit up here, and the front of this boat will be closed up and ready to go. Okay, so now that we've got our power connected at the front here, I'm going to go ahead and plug it back into these fuses up here. Okay, so now that I've got all the power and everything connected, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the unit and test it and make sure I've got power up here. I've already tested with my voltmeter. My voltmeter showed power. I plugged it in, I hit the power button, and as you can see, the unit's booting up. So the reason I like to do this now is there's nothing worse than thinking you're all the way done with this, you button everything up, you plug in the unit, and you have no power. So then you have to open everything back up. So this is just one of the sanity checks I do as soon as I get everything in place before I button it up. All right, so this old unit's been on here quite a while. I went to loosen these, they're pretty tight, so I actually have to get a pair of channel locks to break this free. I'm guessing this hasn't been moved in quite a while. There we go. Now that we've got this old one removed, we will unscrew this gimbal mount from the deck here, and we'll get our HDS 12 live in place. So now we're going to go ahead and drill into this deck. The gentleman that owns this boat likes his gimbals mounted directly to the deck, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to drill through and put this in directly. So now that I've got those out of the way, I do that so that I don't lose my spot. Since we're drilling into carpet, the carpet's going to cover the holes that I drilled. So by holding it in place and putting the first 2 screws in, allows me to come back and do this and everything go and not trying to find holes in the carpet. Okay, so the HDS Live comes with several cap covers to cover what you're not going to be using up here. We're not going to be using the Ethernet port or the HDMI port, so I'm going to cover those up. We're not going to be using one of the Ethernet ports, so I'm going to cover that up. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and cover this one up. That way my Ethernet and my NEMA 2000 are right next to each other. And then we're not going to be using one of the sonar ports up here, which, since we've got a live site on this boat, we're not going to be using channel 2. Live site plugs into channel 1, so I'm going to cover up the channel 2 port. So now that we have all of those covered, we can plug in these transducers and power cables. Now, one thing I like to do when I'm doing this is I try to get the cables pulled up and next to each other while they're still through the hole before we cover it with the grommet and everything, so that we get a nice clean look to it. I'm going to finagle these around a little bit since my Ethernet comes to the outside, or the inside, and my NEMA 2000 comes to the outside. Now we've got all of these plugged in. I'm going to tuck some cables back down in here. just to keep it as clean as possible up here. So now that I got those tucked in, we're gonna grab them all and pull them up just slightly so that everything is clean here for when we put this clam cover back on. Everything's gonna look nice and clean. In just a minute, I'm gonna zip tie all of this stuff up, but the first thing I wanna do, since this unit's on the front of the boat, more than likely, it's gonna be used in this type of position. So I wanna go ahead and put it in this position before I decide on all of the lengths that I needed for my cables. Everything looks good here now. So I'm going to go ahead and take my 3 screws for this and close this back up. Okay, so I've got my clam cover held in place. I've got my screws in here kind of finger tight, just so I know where they're going to be. I'm going to go ahead and step back and look at my cables here again. Everything looks good to me. Actually, I might want just a shade more of this NEMA 2000 cable. Now that everything's all pretty, we'll go ahead and screw these down. All right, so the front of this boat is buttoned up. All we have left to do now is button everything up at the console. Okay, so I got my transducer cable. We're gonna push it through the clam shell hole right here. All right, now that I've got that up, the next thing I'll do is I will take my Ethernet cable and push it up through that hole. So I've got a spool or a bundle of Ethernet wire here. And as soon as we get everything in the proper place, I will secure this wire so that it doesn't move anymore. But for now, it's just going to be tucked in there. And then the next thing I'm going to need to do is pull my NEMA 2000 cable through. So that NEMA 2000 that I poked through does not connect directly from one unit to another. The NEMA 2000 needs to connect to a backbone. When it runs along this direction, we refer to that as the backbone, and we refer to the T's up here as the device side. So along the backbone, you have to have a terminator on each end of the backbone. These will screw in like this. Then this is my power for the NEMA 2000. I don't have it connected underneath the dash yet. I'll be connecting it in just a minute, but it's going to connect to a device right here like this. So I'm going to have power connected to it, and then I'm going to have this unit plugged in here and the front unit plugged in here. So it'll all run along the backbone and through to the devices. So you never plug a device into these ends where the terminators go. You can plug an extension cable in and run an extension cable to another part of the boat, but at the other end of that extension cable, you're going to add T's to it, and at the end of the T, you're going to add a terminator again. If you guys are really interested in learning a little bit more about the NEMA 2000, check out the YouTube video on our Lowrance channel about creating a NEMA 2000 backbone. It'll walk you through the basics on that. So this is ready to go up underneath the dash. I'm going to get it up underneath the dash, get the units plugged into it, get this secured up in there, Then I'll connect this to power, and I will connect this unit to power, and then we'll be done with this install. So now I'm going to feed the power wire down through the top. So now that I got our power cable fed in down here, let's get it plugged into the panel. All right, so now I'm connecting the power where this old power was connected for the previous units on this fuse panel. I'm going to unplug these and plug our unit in. Now that we've got it plugged in at our fuse panel, before I button everything up, just like I did at the front of the boat, I'm going to go ahead and connect my power and turn it on here. So now we can see this unit's booting up. We know that I've got our power in the right spot. So all that's left to do now is button these fuse panels up, finish getting all the transducers plugged in, and we're ready to go. Okay, so like we did with the front unit, we're going to go ahead and put these caps on to protect the USB, the HDMI, one Ethernet port, and at the front you'll remember we covered the black port channel 2. Well, since this is connected to a 3-in-1 transducer, that will only plug into channel 2. So we're going to go ahead and put this cap on channel 1. Protect those pins because they're not going to be in use. So now we've got our 3-in-1, our power, Ethernet, and NEMA 2000. So those are all plugged in. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put our clamshell back on here to cover these cables. Now you may have noticed I'm pulling a little bit of extra cable out. I do that just to make sure that I've got enough cable wherever he wants to turn this unit to use it. We've got the cables already laid out, so just like the front. Now we'll take our drill. So now these are all zipped down. These cables are all nice and pretty. We'll go ahead and get some zip ties put on this stuff and it'll be all nice and clean. And this boat's ready to take to the water and test everything out. All right, everybody, so that's kind of a walkthrough on doing a retrofit on an older boat. You know, again, we took up pretty much the whole hour kind of showing you everything we walked through. There's a lot of stuff that we kind of sped up just so you get an idea. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But again, like we talked about earlier, take your time, do it right, pull out those old cables, make things accessible. You know, these tubes, especially in these older boats, when these were designed, they didn't put as big of tubes in them as they're putting in them nowadays, so because they didn't have as much stuff going through them back then. So again, there's things like that, just again, simple steps, make it easy, make it clean. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them out there. We're going to still take a few questions here at the end of this. Again, get out there, take your family fishing, take kids fishing, take friends fishing. Hashtag Anglers Unite. Send us send us that picture that you take. Send it to our Facebook page. You know, we like seeing your pictures. We like seeing what you guys do on the water. You know, if you get out there and you're taking awesome screenshots, you see a cool bridge, you see something submerged, you know, be it a bus or there's all kinds of stuff that you can find underwater. We found a lot of cars in the past, so stuff like that's really cool when you get a great screenshot of that. So don't forget, you can send that to us on our Lowrance Facebook page also. Again, hashtag those pictures, Anglers Unite. If you guys have any suggestions for webinars that you would like to see in the future, you can also let us know on our Facebook page. That's a great place to get information and send us information. A lot of the stuff that we talked about is also going to be available on the Lowrance YouTube channel. We have a lot of videos and quick tips up there that we've done. You know, one of the things we talked about was the proper way to build a NEMA 2000 network. That information is up on our Lowrance YouTube channel. So don't forget, go to subscribe to our Lowrance YouTube channel. We have all kinds of quick tips that we do. Next month, we're going to have another great webinar for you guys. So don't forget, we'll see you next month on that also. So anyhow, any questions that you've seen, David?
How do I connect the power poles to an Elite Ti2?
Okay, the question was, on your Elite Ti2, how do I connect my power poles? So it's fairly simple. Can you see this unit up here, or do you want me to go to the back unit? Cool. So to do it, what you're going to do is you're going to hit your Pages button, which we've already done. If you go to Settings, and then you go to Wireless, you're going to turn on your Bluetooth right here. So once you turn on the Bluetooth, with your power poles powered up, they'll be able to link together. So that's where you're going to go in and link to your power poles. We do have a video on that on the Lowrance YouTube channel that'll walk you through it, that makes it so much easier. All right, everybody, we hope you enjoyed this webinar. We had a lot of great questions, so don't forget, whoever logged in with their username and asked us the best question of the night is going to win one of our great Lowrance hats and our neck gaiters. You guys stay safe, stay warm. If you're down south where you got open water, we're jealous that you can get out there. If you're up north where you got frozen water, we're jealous that you can get out there and do some ice fishing. Right now, we're kind of stuck here in limbo, but that doesn't matter. We're ready to get some fishing done. Anyhow, thanks for joining us tonight.